Click, subscribe, and hit that bell notification. So this is about patient endurance. Patient endurance. Let's read James chapter 5, verse 6. It says, "You have condemned and murdered the righteous person, and he does not resist you." So we're jumping into the middle of a conversation that James is having. Who is he talking to? What is this, the immediate verse 1 through 6? What is James talking about? So James is bringing an indictment to people who are living under self-direction, self-will. They are the captains of their own life. They don't consider God in their plans, and yet they call themselves Christians. And then he goes and he talks to rich people who are greedy and they're scummy and they manipulate their employees and they're kind of dirtbags, yet they call themselves Christians. And so he talks to wicked, wealthy people. And at the end of it, he says that you have judged and committed people to death unrighteously, right? That their way of life has killed people. But then he says, you've murdered the righteous person, and the righteous person does not resist you. So we're going to swing to the other side. So we were talking about last week the perils of trying to direct your own life and trying to live for yourself and not for Jesus, and the perils of wealth without character and the consequences of that wealth on the day of judgment when you choose wealth over people. This week, we're going to talk about the righteous who suffer in this world, right? So he says that this righteous person, verse 6, does not resist. What does it mean to not resist? So if I'm a cop and I pull you over, woo, what are you going to do? If you don't resist, what are you going to do? You're going to comply. You're going to pull over because you see the siren, or you see the lights and you hear the siren. And then when I get out and I come and I talk to you and I tell you to give me your license and registration, what are you going to do? Give me your license and registration. And then I say, get out of the car, lay down, and I arrest you. What are you going to do? You're going to comply even to the point of arrest. That's what it means that the righteous does not resist, even to the point of death. Now, that's a difficult pill to swallow, particularly, I think, in our culture, because we know our rights. We know that as a citizen, we cannot be pushed around. You can't do that. I'm going to stand up for myself, and I might resist arrest, but I'm going to win in court, and you're going to get sued. That's the general mentality of the modern day American, right? I don't know about you guys, but I see this on YouTube all the time, where it's like these people out to try and trap cops by carrying guns or whatever, and they just, I know my rights, and they treat cops like idiots, right? This is the opposite of that. This is laying down your rights. This is laying down your life for a higher calling. And this is what Jesus did. Though he could command how many angels? Legions upon legions, like 12 legions of angels, he submitted to Pontius Pilate's judgment, even to the point of crucifixion on a cross, because he knew the Father's will. And that's what we're going to talk about moving forward, that in this life, we will suffer. We will be persecuted. We will have difficulties and trials, similar to what we did in James chapter 1. But here, it is suffering particularly at the hands of the circumstances of evil. And that's difficult. Not resisting when evil is thrust upon you. That's extraordinarily difficult, especially in our day and age. And this time, I'd venture to say it could be easier because they didn't have a lot of rights. They didn't have a lot of support. They were outnumbered and they were a minority. So it would be harder to resist and easier to just kind of let it happen. Like, okay, well, it is what it is. They're going to mistreat me because I follow Jesus, and here I am. But James is going to instill that attitude into our hearts. And so he starts in verse 7. He tells us to be patient. therefore, brothers, until the coming of the Lord. And then he talks about a farmer. So what does it mean to be patient? We've looked at the submissive, righteous person who's relinquished himself to suffering, but the only way to manage that is to be patient. So James goes on and he says, be patient. So what is patience? So this word in Greek, to persevere patiently and bravely. I know you can't use the word in the definition, but we're defining the Greek. So anyways, it is to be content in the circumstances and to persevere with bravery. We hear stories. Have you guys ever read Fox's Book of Martyrs? Highly encourage you to read it. I'm probably gonna get my facts wrong. I think it was written in the 16th or 17th century. So a long time ago, 600-700 years ago. And the guy went back in history all the way to Stephen, to the first martyr, and he chronicled every martyr that he could find, and he gave their story, up until the point where people were being burned at the stake, and he had their dying words, and why they were being killed was for the gospel, and he talks about all these stories, and the bravery of these men in the face of murder were calm, they were collected, and they were so clear in their thinking. And they would sing hymns as the flesh melted off their body. And they would pray for people who were persecuting them, even though they were being hacked with clubs and swords and being ripped apart by dogs. They were patient with bravery. They persevered in the midst of their suffering to such an extent that their story has been told from generation to generation. And that is the story of Christendom. That's really the core of Christianity, to be at peace in all circumstances, to be brave and persevere through the difficulty. And so James very clearly says, be patient, settle down, set in and get ready to go. Until when? When is that clock going to be up? When you can let go of your patience and say, whew, we've made it. Until Jesus returns. That's what James says. He says, be patient, therefore, brothers, until, right, the coming of the Lord. That is the buzzer. That's the bell. I think at some point we've all exercised, all of us, right? Have you ever done an exercise that counted down from 1 minute to 0? And you're sitting there and you're grinding, and the beginning of the exercise, you're feeling pretty good, like a plank, or like keep doing push-ups for 30 seconds. Like it's a countdown. It's a 3, 2, 1, whew, take a break, right? In the beginning, you feel good. In the middle, you start to shake, literally start to quiver. And towards the end, all you do is fixate on that number. You are counting the seconds. And this is what James is talking about. The more you are persecuted, the more you hold on and you wait for that buzzer. You wait for the coming of the Lord. You long for it. So when we are suffering, our direction is towards the end goal. Our direction is we have to endure until this point. We cannot back down. We cannot relinquish. We can't stop. We must focus on the goal. Jesus is coming back. This is momentary. We just endure with persevering patience. Now he goes on and he gives us an example. And he says, look at the farmer as he waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the latter rains. What is that picture he's painting? There's always work to be done on a farm. Does that mean that there's always fruit? There's always something to eat? Nope. Does that mean it's always good and pleasant and wonderful? Nope. There's good seasons and there's bad seasons. And he says that the farmer plants in 2 seasons, particularly in the fall, which is the early rain, and then later in the latter rains, which is going to be in spring. So November, October, all the way into like May and April. There's 2 different seasons. So he plants in November and October, but he won't harvest all the way until May or April. And you can imagine that as he has his food stored at his house and he's eating for those months through the winter, he's running out of resources, but he can't go out and pluck up the seeds and the plants. They're not ready. He has to wait for the season when it's ripened. Then he can go and have the source of strength, the source of food, nourishment that he longs for. But it takes patience, and you have to wait through the season. There's always a season in life. There's seasons of glory, and grandeur, comfort, and ease. And there's glory of suffering, chaos, mayhem, sadness, and sorrow, and death. Always a season that we are walking through, and we have to be patient no matter the circumstances and be content with those circumstances. Let's read Romans chapter 8, Romans 8:18. For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is to be revealed to us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of him who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be set free from its bondage to corruption and obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation has been groaning together in the pains of childbirth until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves who have the first fruits of the Spirit groan inwardly as we wait eagerly for adoption as sons, the redemption of our bodies. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. So what he's talking about is that we long for the life to come. We long to put off this perishable flesh and put on the imperishable or immortal new body. And just as James is telling us to be patient and wait for the coming of the Lord, when Jesus returns, that's when we will receive our new bodies, right? In the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, we will be caught up and changed, transformed, metamorphized, right? So not only are we longing and waiting, but Romans chapter 8 tells us that creation will come after us. That when Jesus returns, we will be changed. Then even creation itself will be changed. Because creation, the whole universe, was subjected to futility. And so creation is on its tippy toes waiting for the return of Jesus, right? Just like when you have a battle buddy and you're working out and both of you are suffering together, as that clock counts down, you're both groaning and longing and waiting for the goal, the end result. And creation itself is right there with us, looking for Jesus' return. And he says, we look in hope. We can't see it, and so we hope for it. We long for it. We groan for it. This inward sighing, a heart that is longing for the return of Jesus. And then he says, we wait for it with patience, persevering, bravery, constancy, and endurance. James chapter 5, verse 8. So he talks about the farmer, and he goes to verse 8, and he says, you also be patient. Do you think that's the same word or a different word? It's the same word. So verse 7, James tells us, what does he tell us? To be patient. And then verse 8, we get there, and he's like, just like the farmer, you guys need to be patient. What do you think he's driving at? Probably patience, right? I think it's pretty clear, right? He's repeated himself. Now, as an employee, if my boss repeats himself, he either really means it or I really screwed up. So always pay attention when somebody repeats what they're saying. So he says, be patient and establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. It is immediate. It is right there as though you can grasp it. Jesus' return is imminent. It is just in hand's reach. Now, what does it mean to establish your heart? This word was used of Jesus. Do you know when it was used of Jesus? When Jesus established something? He knew that he was going to be going to the cross. Everybody told him not to go to Jerusalem. They're like, everybody's trying to kill you. And then it says, Jesus established his face towards Jerusalem. He set his face towards Jerusalem. It literally means to hold your face in one direction. It is set like a flint. Have you guys ever tried to start a fire with a ferro rod? Thank you. You can't have a limp wrist. When you strike it, there has to be a sharp edge that it can grind on to create sparks. It is a firm, established, fixed gaze. It is directing your heart with purpose and intention to establish upon this one thing and to never turn from it. That's what Jesus did. He set his face like a flint to Jerusalem. And his goal was the cross. He knew the crucifixion was coming, and he set his face to it, and nobody and nothing would keep him from it. So likewise, we are to establish or set ourselves, our heart, on the return of Christ. Now, keep in mind the atmosphere of the believer in this scenario. What is James talking about that this lifestyle looks like? What is the circumstances of this person's life when they are setting their hope and their gaze and their face? They are being established upon the return of Jesus. Suffering. It is based on suffering and difficulty, longing for that new life, waiting for the redemption of our bodies, or as we read in Romans, the adoption as sons, that we will receive our promised inheritance, that new body, eternal, not the tent, but the mansion. And so he says, you also be patient, establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Verse 9, do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. What do you think about grumbling, complaining? Why would you be complaining? James has talked about life circumstances. He's talked about persecution. He's talked about the rich oppressing the poor. And then he gets to this point and he says, do not grumble against what? One another. Do you know what makes life difficult? People. People make life hard. Do you know what makes church difficult? People. Do you know how easy it is to complain about people? It's very easy because people are problematic. I am sure people complain about me a bit. I don't want to be over dramatic. I'm sure it's a bit. So it's easy to get an atmosphere of grumbling and complaining, particularly when life is hard. They don't know what I'm going through, and how can they say that? And these people are always doing this, and I can't believe that person sinned, and they did that, and the pastor said this. It's not vocal. It's turmoil within the soul. It means a sighing or a grumbling under your breath that other people don't know about. It's like the ocean that has the current under it, but is calm above. You're like, oh, I'm gonna go swimming. And then you just get sucked away in the current. That's what James is telling us to avoid. Not only are we to be content in all things, not only are we to suffer with patience, but we are to not grumble or lack patience with other people. It is to allow other people to inconvenience you and not, truly in earnest, not complain and think negative thoughts about other people. I was helping out at the church, And we were serving, I think it was the ladies' night, and we were serving the ladies. There was lemonade, there was cold tea, there was water, there was juice, there was coffee. There was a lot of drinks provided for these ladies. And a woman walks up and she says, "Can you make me some hot water so I can brew this tea?" She brought her own tea. Now to me, I didn't think anything of it. I'm happy to serve you. Here's some hot water. I'll find a way of doing it. And I did it for her. And the person that I was working with was like, "Wow, you're so generous." Because that was annoying. And then the person proceeded to tell me how they didn't like that attitude of that person. That is grumbling. I've been a servant since I was 3 years old. I wasn't a Christian. I was raised as a servant. So it's in my nature. It's not hard for me to get taken advantage of. Let's put it that way. Okay? So it doesn't bother me a lick. I'm happy to provide whatever you're asking. If I have the means and it's not like terribly inconvenient, it's not a big deal. But I found it interesting that the grumbling can come from such a small and insignificant request. What we see in church all the time, you guys probably don't see it. People complaining about the music, people complaining about the sermon, about the notes, about if there is something to be complained about, somebody is complaining about it. Right, they finished it early. They finished too late. There's too many notes. There's not enough notes at all. It is easy for people to complain about things. And this is what he's saying. Don't be a complainer. But it is also easy to get frustrated with what? The complainers. What happens when you complain about the complainers? You just opted into that group. You became the grumbler. And so he is saying, be patient in your heart. Be still. It is okay for other people to be prickly. And when they poke you, you don't need to pop. It's okay that your blood is shed. It's okay that now this is a tough one. I had this conversation with a Mormon. It's okay for you to be taken advantage of. In Corinthians, Paul says, is it not better that if somebody were to sue you, that you should just lose the lawsuit? Why would brother take brother to court? Isn't it better to be wronged? That's the apostle's explanation. Because listen, bad things are going to happen to you that shouldn't affect your character, nor the state of your heart. Why? Because the judge is standing in the door. It's a courtroom and we are all sitting in it, and the judge is peering in, waiting for his arrival to commit his judgment. So he says this in verse 9, do not grumble against one another. Why? So that you may not be judged. Every nuance of our hearts is beheld by the Lord. And then he says, behold, right? See or look. Right? This is like kids when they're making a mess at home and their parents are away and they know the parents are going to come home, so they have the lookout. And the lookout's like, they're here, they're here, they're here. And then it's a mad dash to clean up. This is what James is saying. Behold, the judge is at the door. So when you sigh and you grumble, look, the judge is arriving. The imminence of Christ coming. He is coming immediately. He is at hand. And what is he going to do? He's going to judge. Where does judgment begin? Go for the bad people, right? Get to the evil rapist, the child molester. Take out the bad people. Jesus is going to judge them. Yeah. Judgment begins at the house of God. Judgment begins with his children. So he gives us some examples. Verse 10, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. So now we are suffering. We are living a life of victory. We are being a conquering king. We are being a prophet and proclaiming the word, or we're being kicked in the teeth, literally or figuratively. We're suffering the loss of our loved ones, the loss of our jobs, the loss of dignity, the loss of respect. We're losing our friends. We're losing our family. We're suffering in the name of the Lord. And he tells us this, remember the prophets. They suffered for him and they told us about him. They spoke in the name of the Lord. Remember the prophets. What prophets do you think he's talking about? James is talking about the saints of old, right? The prophets would be the people who gave us the scriptures. Remember their stories? Let's read Hebrews chapter 11. We're going to read about victory. We're going to read about triumph. We're going to read about great faith in God. And then we're also going to read about how the world was not worthy of the least of these men. The world was not worthy of these men. And look at what happened to them. Verse 32, for what shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and of the prophets. It's a generic term, right? Now listen to what they did. These people, through faith, conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. Who stopped the mouths of lions? Daniel. Quenched the power of fire. Who's that? Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael. Right? Also another book in Daniel. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego for the heathens in the room. They escaped the edge of the sword. They were made strong out of weakness. You know, that's very encouraging, right? Those are the prophets I like to read about. I like to read about, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah as they were wandering around in the furnace, right? And how, like the Son of Man was there with them. Like, that's so glorious. It's so wonderful. That's awesome. That really encourages me. Like, I'm going to be a victor. Or like, I'm going to get thrown in a lion's den and the angels shut the mouth so the lion wouldn't eat me because I'm so special. I like that story. That's a good story. But then he goes on and he says, they were made strong out of weakness. They became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received back their dead by resurrection, but some were tortured, refusing to accept release so that they might rise again to a better life. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. They were killed with the sword. And they went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated. Otherwise, just poor. They didn't have anything. 38, of whom the world was not worthy. They were wandering about in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. They were vagabonds. They were dejected. They were rejected. They were cast outs. They were misfits. And they were happy to do it for the name of the Lord. The world was not worthy of these people. Those are the people that we need to remember, right? Remember David fighting Goliath? That's important to remember. Do you remember Isaiah getting thrown into a pit? Just getting stuck down there and they'd give him a little bit of food and a little bit of water as the Babylonians tried to conquer? That's worthy to remember. Remember the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord, and they will be an example of being patient in suffering. And he goes on in verse 39, all of these, though commended through their faith, like God gave them a standing applause. It's kind of the idea. They were commended by their great faith. And though they suffered all of these things and they did all of this stuff for their God, listen to this, they did not receive what was promised. They were waiting for Jesus and they didn't get to see him yet. Why? Since God had provided something better for us, so that apart from us, they should not be made perfect. The resurrection has not happened yet. Why? Because the fullness of the church has not come. When Jesus comes back, we will all together be resurrected. First the dead, then the living, and together we will all receive the promise. And so these men, they had faith and they endured through torture and sorrow, victory, triumph, and prosperity, and they longed for the promise of a new body, and they waited for it because God is providing it to who? Us. He is providing to us the resurrection from the dead, along with all the prophets of old, all of us together. So that's example number 1, the prophets. Now, example number 2, verse 11, behold, we consider those blessed who remained steadfast. Do you think Isaiah was blessed? You think David was blessed? Joshua? Moses? Real question here. Do you guys know Moses' story? I think we should study Exodus next, because Moses is one of the greatest prophets of old. And do you know that his brother and sister tried to get him killed? That he stood as a leader of millions of people and not one person supported him? Well, no, only one person. I say Joshua, son of Nun, supported him. But everybody else, he was dejected and abandoned. They tried to stone him to death. They tried to kill him multiple times. Yet, he probably is one of the most blessed prophets of old because he was steadfast, immovable for the purpose of God. Then he says, 11b, you have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord. Can anybody remind me of Job? I love what he says to his wife when his wife is like, just give up. Just curse God and die. And he's like, woman, do you not know that God can give and God can take away? Blessed be the Lord. I think that is that root of being established, right? Establish your heart on the return of the Lord means this. He gives and he takes away, but God is still amazing. He is merciful and he is compassionate. And that's actually what James says is what we learn from Job. Job lost his sons, he lost his wealth, and he lost his health. The only thing he didn't lose was his life. I think he even lost his wife momentarily. Probably not like divorced, but she was like, I'm done. Can you just be done already? And he's like, no, I'm not done. He had nothing. His best friends, let's say we've been doing this study for 25 years. You guys show up every day for 25 years. And then I go through a difficult bout and all of you call me a sinner and say it's my fault. That's what happened to Job. All of his friends turned on him and talked mad trash. And the more he defended himself, the worse they got. They're like, Job, you've done something, buddy. You better repent. And he's like, no, I get it. I'm a sinner. I've done some stuff, but I haven't purposely gone out of my way to be sinful. I'm trying to serve the Lord. And they're like, you deserve this. Long story short, what he says we should learn from Job is that God had a purpose. He says you can see the purpose of the Lord in Job's life and how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. That God in Job's story is compassionate and merciful. I don't know about you. When I read Job, I don't think to myself how compassionate and how merciful. Because I don't understand the amount of suffering that he went through and how God has shown himself to be merciful and compassionate through suffering. So I want to bridge that gap and maybe help us out a little bit. I think Hebrews chapter 2, verse 10 will help us. For it was fitting that he, that is Jesus, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. So this is saying that Jesus was perfected in suffering. Now, was he perfect? Yes. But it means that the path required for him to take was finished, right? He had to uphold the entire law. So without living a life to thoroughly express the entirety of the law, it was not complete. That's what it means to be perfect, to be completed in its role or in its task. Jesus was found completely and thoroughly finished in his task of bringing many sons to glory. And so he found the completion of that task through what? Suffering. So it says that he was perfected through suffering. Verse 11, for he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source, that's God. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers. Jesus calls us brothers. Why? Because he suffered our shame, our guilt, our burden, and he suffers with us. And he is not ashamed of us. And so he says, that's my brother. These are my people. That is the compassionate mercy of God, that his own son would suffer as we suffer. When Job suffered, it was an emblem of the day that God's son would suffer. Just as Job lost his children, God would lose his child. Just as Job had everybody turn against him, so everybody turned against Jesus. If you want to see the mercy and the compassion of God, everything that Job suffered, Jesus suffered. God experienced that suffering in the flesh. That's compassion and that's mercy. It's very similar to if you are a drug addict, I go out of my way to go into the crack house that you're living in. I go in there, it's infested with rats and disease and all the things, and I come and get you. I pick you up in all of your filth and I carry you out. And all the grime that you have picked up on this journey of sin, I participate in. That's compassion and that's mercy. That's what Jesus did. When we read Job, God is using him as that example to encourage us, but his compassion and mercy is that he himself has walked through that suffering with us. We are not alone nor abandoned. And so he says in verse 12, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation, and I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has the power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God, to make propitiation or payment for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. That is the purpose of God in our suffering. And Paul goes on to say this, just as we are comforted in our sufferings, so now we can comfort others. Because we experience the suffering, we can turn around and help those who are suffering. This is similar for me. This is those who have, those who have gone to prison, I can relate to quite a bit. Those who are the sinners of the highest sort, I can relate to those guys. Those who are suffering with chronic sin, probably drugs or pornography or pride or arrogance, I know all of those sins and I have walked that journey and I have been comforted and delivered and found victory through the blood of Christ. And so now, the very thing that I walked through, I can help others. So it is with Christ as our faithful high priest. In all his compassion, he has paid for our sins. And not only that, he has compassion on us because he's been there. He suffered in his life, and now he helps us in our suffering. His great mercy and compassion for us. Now, he jumps into James chapter 5. He jumps into like another twist here, and he says, above all of this, what is higher than all of these things? If we were to say patience and endurance, waiting and longing for the hope of Jesus' return, I don't think it gets much higher than that. But he says this, above all, my brothers, do not swear either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but let your yes be yes and your no be no, so that you may not fall under condemnation. Above everything we just talked about, and I looked up this word above all, it literally means above and everything. Like, it's those two words put together. Above everything, your yes matters and your no matters. How is that above all things? I thought that was a curiosity. I'm like, come on, James, is this really the peak of what you want to talk about? This is the core and the crux of what's most important? Not swearing an oath? Cross my heart, hope to die? Swear on my mama's grave? Swear to God? I swear upon the life of my child? Swearing is not actually culturally all that important anymore. It was very important back in their day, to be fair. It was, if you said, I swear upon the temple, people would hold you to it. But you would swear upon a higher thing. James is quoting verbatim exactly what Jesus said. And he says, all oath swearing is evil. Why? It's manipulation. You are trying to get people to take you at your word by compounding the word or the strength of your word with the quality of another thing, right? I swear upon what? Something that is more important, that is greater than me. I swear to God. I swear, cross my heart, hope to die. That's like, I swear my life, right? And James is saying this, there is nothing that you can swear that is higher than just simply saying, I mean what I mean. How do you get people to trust your word? Your word should be your highest bond, not another thing. If you swear to God, your word should be equal to what? The character of God. You and I need to be so self-controlled that if you tell somebody, I will be there in 5 minutes, you will be there in 5 minutes. If you say to somebody, I will pay you back, you will pay them back. Even if they give you the out, even if you can find a reason not to do it. Oh, well, you know, my paycheck. Oh, well, you know, I have lots of excuses, right? No, it takes self-control. It means that your character is above reproach. That if people look at you, they don't question the validity of what you say. So I deal with this at work. I make my mistakes at work, okay? So I was driving a forklift and there was a curb, concrete, and I was picking something up and I broke the curb. The GC comes out like 3 weeks later. I didn't say anything just because it slipped my mind. And we were sitting there, we were talking, and he's like, oh man, somebody hit the curb. You know what I immediately told him? Yeah, that was me, my bad. My fault. I did that. I took the opportunity to show him that I am a person of integrity. And yes, I made a mistake, but I will be responsible for it, and I will bear the cost of it. And this goes through the whole building. Every time something comes up that it is my fault, I will gladly own it. My crew did that, we performed this thing, and I caused this problem. So what happens later when somebody says, who did that? And I don't speak up? What is their thought? Must be somebody else because he's not saying anything. They don't even question it. That's the quality of character that we build in our relationships. So if I tell them, I will be there and I will perform this work and I will do this and this and this and this, they know that within my ability, I will perform it. There's always circumstances that can negate it, but I will do everything in my power to perform it. Difficult to get there, I'll tell you what. So I made a really big mistake, probably cost the company upwards of 50 grand just because I made mistakes. So I was talking to my project manager and I was like, how are we gonna fix this? I need to spin this, right? The temptation is there. I need to spin this because I wanna get them to pay for my mistake. And I love what he said because it hit so hard. He said, sometimes it's worth just saying we made a mistake and taking it. And I'm like, wow, I failed here, but that was such a good point. And I'm glad. Yeah, my yes needs to matter. And the way that I do that is by owning even this massive mistake. I don't mind owning small mistakes. Big mistakes are hard to own. I'll tell you what are some applications we can take away from this? So resolving patience, right? Jesus set his face to Jerusalem like a flint. We are establishing our hearts in patience. No grumbling, no complaining until, right? We've been working out, and there's nothing worse than having a bad workout partner when it's got 10 seconds to go and they're just crying and being like, I want this to be over with, instead of being like, we got this, we can do it, right? Like, the encouragement matters. And it's the same way in the Christian faith. Having people around you that is encouraging, and as they establish their hearts in the coming of the Lord, and you establish your heart in the coming of the Lord, and you encourage one another as you see the day drawing near, that's the key. Resolving patience. Rescue is coming. The Lord is at hand. Time is near. It's immediate. It's imminent. We're just waiting. You just got to hold that plank. And then God is compassionate and merciful. That's something that is important to root and resonate in our hearts. He is compassionate and merciful. And then honesty is the best policy, and building character matters. Above all these things, that's what James says, your character matters most of all. Next week, we're going to talk about community in faith, James chapter 5, 13 through 20. So be here or be square.